The road up the mountain had been empty for the last 12 miles. No houses, no mailboxes, no cell signal, just a narrow ribbon of cracked asphalt cutting through pine and rock, climbing higher with every turn. By the time I reached the final bend, the world felt muted, like someone had turned the volume knob all the way down. Even the wind seemed hesitant up there. I slowed instinctively, my tires crunching over loose gravel as the trees opened into the clearing I recognized from the listing photos. Same slope, same jagged line of boulders on the left, same dark silhouette of the A-frame cabin rising out of the fog. For a second, relief washed over me. I hadn't imagined it. I hadn't been scammed. The place was real. But then I noticed the tracks. They cut straight through the thin layer of frost on the dirt drive, fresh, deep, careless. Not the faint, half-erased lines you'd expect from an abandoned property. These were recent, wide, multiple passes. Someone had been driving up here, recently, often. I eased off the accelerator and let the truck roll forward, my eyes scanning the ground, then the porch, then the windows. The cabin looked different than I remembered. Not in any dramatic way, no broken glass, no missing boards, but different in the subtle way that sets off alarms you can't quite explain. The porch light was off, but the bulb was new. There was a welcome mat that hadn't been there before. A pair of muddy boots sat neatly beside the door, toes pointing inward like they belonged. I told myself not to jump to conclusions. Maybe the realtor had sent someone up to check on the place. Maybe the estate's attorney had hired a caretaker I hadn't been told about yet. There were explanations, reasonable ones. Still, my hand didn't immediately go for the door handle. I shut off the engine, and the silence rushed back in, thick, pressing, almost uncomfortable. No birds, no wind in the trees, just that hollow mountain quiet that makes every small sound feel amplified. I could hear the ticking of my engine cooling, each metallic pop echoing in my ears. Then I smelled smoke. Not wildfire smoke, not distant, close, like a wood stove that had been burning recently. I frowned and leaned forward, peering through the windshield. That's when I noticed the thin line of grey drifting from the chimney at the back of the house. My stomach tightened. This wasn't someone checking the place. Someone was living here. Before I could fully process that thought, the front door opened. She stepped out like she'd been waiting for me. Mid-50s maybe. Hair pulled back tight, flecked with grey. She wore a heavy sweater and jeans like this was her yard, her mountain, her morning routine. No hesitation, no confusion. Just a steady walk down the porch steps, boots hitting wood with practiced familiarity. I stayed in the truck, frozen, watching her approach. She didn't wave, didn't smile, didn't look surprised to see a stranger's vehicle in the driveway. If anything, she looked annoyed, like I was late or interrupting something. She stopped a few feet from my driver's side door and folded her arms. I cracked the window. "Can I help you?" she asked. Her tone wasn't curious. It wasn't cautious. It was the tone someone uses when they already believe they're in charge. I started, then stopped. My brain lagged behind the moment, trying to catch up. "I'm here about the house." Her expression hardened instantly. "What house?" she said. I gestured behind her, up at the cabin. "That one." She let out a short, humorless laugh and shook her head. "No, you're not." I blinked. "I'm sorry. This is private property," she said, enunciating every word. "You need to turn around and leave." For a half second I thought she was joking. The absurdity of it almost made me smile. I glanced past her again, at the porch, the boots, the faint curl of smoke, and then back at her face. She wasn't joking. "I think there's been a misunderstanding," I said carefully, pushing the door open and stepping out. The cold hit me immediately, sharp and biting. "I just bought this place." She stepped closer, closing the distance before I could even straighten up. "No," she said flatly. "You didn't." The confidence in her voice was unsettling. Not loud, not aggressive, just absolute, like she was stating a fact everyone already knew. "I have the paperwork," I said, more to reassure myself than her. She waved a dismissive hand. "We've seen your type before." My chest tightened. "My type? Out-of-towners," she said. "People who think a piece of paper means more than history." I glanced around again, really looking this time. There were tire ruts leading behind the cabin, A stack of firewood neatly arranged against the side wall, curtains in the windows, actual fabric, not dusty remnants. A wind chime hung from the eaves, gently clinking as the breeze finally picked up. "How long have you been here?" I asked. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she turned and looked back at the house, then at the land beyond it, like she was surveying something she owned. "Long enough," she said. "Long before you showed up." My phone buzzed in my pocket. No signal, just a delayed notification from earlier. The sound felt intrusive, out of place. "I'm not trying to cause trouble," I said. "If someone told you this place was yours, we should probably sort that out." Her eyes snapped back to me. "There is nothing to sort out," she said. "This house has been in our care for decades. We kept it standing when no one else cared. We paid for repairs. We protected it. That doesn't make it yours," I said before I could stop myself. Her jaw tightened. "You need to leave." Behind her, movement flickered in one of the windows. A shadow, then another. Shapes passing by like people trying not to be seen. "You're not alone," I said. She smiled then, but it didn't reach her eyes. "My family's inside," she said, "and they don't appreciate strangers showing up unannounced." I felt the ground shift beneath me, not physically, but mentally. The story I'd been telling myself, the quiet renovation, the solitude, the fresh start, was cracking apart in real time. "I'm not a stranger," I said. "I'm the owner." That's when her expression changed completely. Not anger, not fear, pity. She tilted her head slightly, studying me the way you might look at someone who doesn't realize they've already lost. "Sweetheart," she said, lowering her voice, "if you were the owner, you wouldn't be standing here right now." The wind picked up again, carrying the smell of smoke and damp earth. Somewhere deeper in the woods, a branch snapped. I became acutely aware of how far I was from anyone else, how empty the road behind me was. I looked at the house one more time. The boots, the firewood, the curtains, the people watching from inside, and a single unsettling thought settled in my mind. If they were this comfortable telling me to leave, how long had they been waiting for me to come back? She didn't raise her voice. That was the strange part. If she had yelled, if she'd cursed or threatened me, my brain could have categorized her as hostile and moved on to the next emotion. But she didn't. She spoke the way people do when they believe the conversation is already over, like she was explaining gravity to someone who didn't understand falling. She took one slow step back toward the porch, not retreating, just repositioning herself, so the house was squarely behind her. Framed, claimed. Her body language did most of the talking. This wasn't a confrontation in her mind, it was a correction. "Everyone knows this is ours," she said, glancing briefly toward the trees, as if the mountain itself might nod in agreement. I followed her gaze instinctively. There was nothing there, just pine, rock, and the empty slope rolling down into fog. No neighbors, no witnesses, no one to confirm or deny what she'd just said. "I'm not sure who everyone is," I replied. "Carefully." She smiled again, that tight, patient smile people use when they think they're dealing with someone slow. "Locals," she said. "People who've been here longer than 5 minutes." I felt heat creep up my neck. I'm not trying to disrespect anyone. I just bought the place. Legally. She waved that word away like a fly. "That's what they all say." "All who?" I asked. She ignored the question and continued, pacing a few steps along the porch, her hand trailing along the railing with familiarity. "When the old owner got sick, nobody wanted this place. Too remote, too much work. Everyone knew that. We were the ones who came up here, fixed the roof, kept vandals out, made sure it didn't rot into the ground." Her voice softened slightly when she said it, like she was reminiscing, like she wanted me to picture her up here in the snow, hammer in hand, sacrificing comfort for duty. "He promised us," she added casually, "said we could have it one day." There it was. Not dramatic, not emotional, just slipped into the conversation like an established fact. "I'm sorry," I said. "Promised you what exactly?" She stopped pacing and turned to face me again. "The house, the land, all of it." I waited for her to elaborate, to pull out a document, a letter, anything. She didn't. "When did he promise you this?" I asked. "A long time ago," she said. back when people still kept their word. Something about the way she said it made my stomach sink. It wasn't defensive, it wasn't desperate, it was practiced, like she'd told this story many times and had learned which parts to leave vague. I went through the estate, I said slowly. There were no heirs listed, no caretake. Aris, no claims. She let out a small sigh, exaggerated, like she was tired of explaining something obvious. Of course there weren't. He didn't trust lawyers. He trusted people. Behind her, the door creaked open just a fraction. I caught a glimpse of a teenage boy inside, tall, broad-shouldered, eyes locked on me with open hostility. He didn't step out, just watched. You can't just live somewhere and decide it's yours, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. She tilted her head. We didn't just live here, we took care of it. The words landed differently than I expected, not as an argument but as a moral claim, as if care itself conferred ownership, as if effort rewrote law. For years, she continued, when no one else bothered, when it was falling apart, when the road washed out and the power lines went down, we were here. I looked at the cabin again, trying to reconcile her story with what I knew. The inspection photos had shown years of neglect, rotting boards, a leaking roof that had clearly gone unfixed for a long time. But doubt has a way of slipping in when someone speaks with certainty. If you were caretakers, I said, why wasn't that disclosed? She shrugged. Because no one asked us. That answer didn't make sense, and she knew it, but she didn't pause long enough for me to challenge it. Look, she said, her tone shifting slightly, almost conciliatory. I don't think you're a bad guy. I really don't. You were probably misled. It happens. Realtors just want their commission. Estate lawyers don't care who they hurt. There it was again, the subtle repositioning. She wasn't the obstacle. She was the reasonable one. I was the victim of someone else. It's a mistake, but that doesn't change the facts on the ground, she went on. We live here. Our kids grew up here. This place is part of our family. I glanced at the porch again, at the boots, at the wind chime, at the firewood. Everything about it looked lived in a way that made arguing feel abstract. I haven't seen any mailboxes, I said. Any utilities in your name? Her eyes flicked to mine, sharp for just a second, then softened again. Mountain living isn't like the city. We don't need paperwork for everything. The teenage boy in the doorway shifted, stepping closer now, just enough to be visible. Another figure moved behind him, a woman maybe, watching, listening. You should probably talk to the old owner's people, she said. They'll tell you the same thing. I did, I replied. That's how I bought it. Her smile faded just a little. Not gone. Cracked. Then they lied to you, she said, because this house was never really his to give away. That sentence hung between us, heavy and confusing. It didn't fit any legal framework I knew, but it sounded profound enough to give pause. Never his? I repeated. He inherited it, she said. Didn't earn it. Didn't understand it. Some things don't belong to one person just because a piece of paper says so. I felt a flicker of doubt again, unwelcome and irrational. The mountain, the isolation, the way she spoke like a steward instead of a squatter. It was unsettling how convincing confidence could be when there was no one else around to contradict it. So what are you saying? I asked. That I should just walk away? She studied me for a moment, eyes narrowing slightly, measuring something. Then she nodded. That would be the smart thing, she said. Save yourself a lot of trouble. Trouble from who? I asked. She didn't answer directly. Instead, she gestured toward the house again, toward the people inside. We're not going anywhere, she said, and the community knows that. I felt that word land like a weight. Community, an invisible force I couldn't see or quantify, a room I wasn't in. If you try to force this, she continued, you're going to make enemies. People won't take kindly to that. She said it calmly. Not as a threat, as a warning, the kind that pretends to be helpful. I just want to fix the place up, I said. Use it on weekends. I'm not trying to push anyone out of anything they rightfully own. She nodded slowly, like she appreciated the sentiment but found it naive. Intentions don't change reality. The teenage boy stepped fully onto the porch now, arms crossed, jaw tight. He stared at me like I was already trespassing on something sacred. "This isn't a negotiation," she said. "It's just how things are." For a moment, I considered pulling out my phone, calling someone, anyone. But there was no signal, and even if there were, I wasn't sure who I'd call. The police? A lawyer? None of that felt immediate enough for what was happening. She took a step closer again, lowering her voice. "I'd hate for you to waste time and money fighting something you can't win," she said, "especially when everyone around here knows the truth." I looked at her face, searching for cracks, for nerves, for anything that suggested she was bluffing. I didn't find it. She believed every word she was saying, or at least she had convinced herself she did. And standing there, alone on a mountain with a family watching from behind her, I felt the first real wave of uncertainty hit me. Not about the deed, about how much confidence alone could rewrite reality if enough people accepted it. She turned away then, already done with me, and called back over her shoulder, "You should go. We'll talk again if there's anything to talk about." As she disappeared back into the house, the door closing firmly behind her, I stood there in the cold, staring at a home I legally owned, but suddenly didn't feel welcome in, wondering how many people she'd already told this story to, and how many of them believed her. I didn't leave right away. After the door closed behind her, I stood there longer than I probably should have, staring at the wood grain like it might rearrange itself into an explanation. The mountain was quiet again, but it felt different now, less empty, more watchful, like I'd wandered into the middle of a story that had already been going on without me. Eventually, reason kicked back in. I walked back to my truck, climbed inside and shut the door. The familiar smell of dust and coffee grounds steadied me a little. I sat there for a moment, hands on the steering wheel, breathing, replaying everything she'd said, the confidence, the phrases. "Everyone knows, he promised us, we've always taken care of it." They weren't legal arguments, they were social ones. I reached into the glove compartment and pulled out the folder I'd brought with me. I hadn't planned on needing it on the first visit, but some instinct had made me toss it in before leaving home. Inside were copies of everything: the purchase agreement, the estate sale deed, documents, the title report, the deed with the county stamp still sharp and dark. Paper felt grounding in a way nothing else did. I stepped back out into the cold, folder under my arm, and walked toward the porch again, not with confrontation in mind, but clarity, for myself more than anyone else. I needed to hear the facts out loud. She opened the door again almost immediately, like she'd been watching through the window the whole time. "You're still here," she said, irritation slipping into her voice for the first time. "I am," I replied, "because I want to be very clear." I opened the folder and pulled out the first document. "This property was sold through an estate," I said, keeping my tone level. "The owner passed away, no heirs. The probate court handled the sale." She crossed her arms again, but she didn't interrupt. "I went through a licensed realtor," I continued. "There was a full title search, no liens, no claims, no caretaker agreements, nothing." I held up the deed now, tapping the stamped seal at the bottom. "This was recorded with the county 3 weeks ago," I said. "That makes me the legal owner." For a brief moment, just a flicker, something crossed her face. Not fear, not panic, calculation, like she was adjusting her footing. "That doesn't mean what you think it means," she said. "It means exactly what it says," I replied. "Ownership transferred legally." She let out a slow breath through her nose. "You don't understand how things work up here." I nodded. "That may be true, but the law works the same everywhere." Behind her, the door shifted again. The teenage boy was closer now, fully visible, arms still crossed, eyes flicking between me and the papers in my hand. Another adult stood behind him, half hidden, whispering something I couldn't hear. "This was an estate sale," I repeated. "If there were any legitimate claims, family, caretakers, anything, they would have surfaced during probate. That's how the process works." She shook her head, a tight, dismissive motion. "Processes miss things. They don't miss people living on the property," I said. That landed harder than I expected. Her jaw tightened. "We weren't living here," she said carefully. "We were maintaining it. For 8 months?" I asked before I could stop myself. Her eyes snapped to mine, so she knew the timeline mattered. I didn't push further. Not yet. I didn't need to. The relief I felt in that moment wasn't about winning an argument. It was about anchoring myself again, about remembering that this situation, as surreal as it felt, still existed in the real world with real rules. "I'm not here to argue morality," I said. "I'm here because this is my property." She stared at me for a long moment, then looked past me, down the driveway toward the road. I followed her gaze and noticed something I hadn't before. A truck idling at the edge of the clearing. Not mine. It sat just far enough away to pretend it wasn't watching, but close enough that there was no doubt. An older pickup. Mud splattered. Someone inside, engine running, eyes on us. Another shape moved near the tree line, then another. People. Not approaching. Just present. The realization hit me slowly and all at once. This wasn't a private disagreement. This was a performance. "You should go," she said again, but this time there was an edge to it. Not urgency. Ought. "Horrity." "I will," I replied, "but I'll be coming back. With notice. And with the proper steps." She smiled faintly. "You can do whatever you think you can do." As I turned away, I felt it, the weight of being observed. The subtle pressure of eyes I couldn't meet. No one said anything. No one challenged me openly. But I could feel the judgment settling in. Quiet and collective. Outsider. Troublemaker. The guy trying to take something that didn't belong to him. I loaded the folder back into my truck and started the engine. As I backed out, I caught glimpses of faces in side mirrors. A nod here, a frown there. No hostility, just distance. By the time I reached the bend in the road and the cabin disappeared behind the trees, my initial relief had thinned into something more complicated. I was the legal owner. On paper, I was solid. But ownership, I was starting to realize, wasn't just about deeds and stamps. It was about belief, about whose story traveled faster, about who the town decided to trust when two versions of reality collided. That's when it hit me, sharp and unsettling. This wasn't just about the house. It was about who the town decided to believe. I didn't go back up the mountain the next day, not because I didn't want to, but because every practical instinct told me to slow down. The situation wasn't explosive. It was worse than that. It was quiet, settled, like something that had decided to wait me out. Instead, I started making calls. The realtor first. Calm, professional, slightly alarmed but not surprised. She confirmed what I already knew. Clean estate sale, no disclosed occupants, no claims during probate. Then the title company. Same answer. Clear chain. No encumbrances, no recorded easements, no caretaker agreements hiding in the margins. Legally, she said, you're fine. That word again, legally. By the third call, the relief I'd felt on the mountain had flattened into something colder. I was technically right, and practically stuck. 2 days later, I drove back up. Nothing had changed. And that somehow made it worse. The same boots on the porch, same curtains, same smoke curling lazily from the chimney like a signal fire. But now there was a new addition, a handwritten note taped to the front door. Neighborhood meeting, private property, no trespassing, no signature, no date, just implication. I stood there longer than I should have, reading it twice, then a third time, like it might reveal something new. It didn't. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't even aggressive. It was confident, assumptive, written as if the question of who owned the place had already been decided by someone other than me. I took a photo and left. That night, my phone started buzzing. At first it was subtle, a message from a local number I didn't recognize. Heard you trying to kick a family out of their home. No punctuation, no greeting. I didn't respond. The next morning, another message. Might want to rethink that. This town remembers things. Then another. People take care of their own up here. By the end of the week, the messages had spread beyond my phone. I stopped at a gas station near the base of the mountain and felt the shift immediately. Conversations paused when I walked in. Eyes lingered a second too long. The cashier was polite but distant, like she'd already been told something about me and was deciding whether it was true. I didn't need to ask. The story was moving without me. Back at the cabin, the notes multiplied. Not threatening, never explicit, just present. Please respect local history. This place isn't what you think. Some things can't be bought. They appeared on fence posts, on the edge of the driveway, once folded neatly under my windshield wiper. Karen's family never confronted me directly again. They didn't need to. Their strategy was patience, occupation, normalizing their presence until my ownership looked like the disruption. When I called the sheriff's office, the deputy was polite, almost apologetic. "It's a civil matter," he said. "You've got a deed. They're claiming residency. We can't remove anyone without a court order. So I just—" "Wait?" I asked. "I'd recommend talking to a lawyer," he replied, "and maybe avoiding direct contact." Avoiding contact was easy. They were everywhere without ever being near me. Their truck was always parked at the cabin when I drove by, sometimes 2, sometimes 3. Friends, maybe, family, support. It was hard to tell. Lawn chairs appeared on the porch. A flag went up near the driveway, not a national one, a local one, symbolic, territorial. They waved at passers-by. I got another message. Funny how fast outsiders get bored when they realize things aren't simple. I stopped answering unknown numbers. Then the stories reached me through other channels. A friend of a friend mentioned hearing about some guy from out of town trying to flip a mountain house and toss out the caretakers. Someone else said they'd heard I planned to tear the place down. Another claimed I was working with developers. None of it was as true. All of it was effective. The worst part wasn't the lies. It was how reasonable they sounded when filtered through distance and repetition. Each version softened just enough to feel plausible. Concerned locals, a vulnerable family, an absentee owner. I was technically right and practically powerless. Every system I trusted was moving at a pace completely disconnected from what was happening on the ground. Lawyers talked in weeks. Courts talked in months. The mountain operated in days. Karen's family settled in deeper. They planted a small garden near the side of the house, installed a new lock on the shed, hung a bird feeder. Ordinary things, domestic things. The kind of details that made it harder psychologically to imagine them leaving. When I showed up one afternoon to document the property line, Karen stood on the porch and watched silently. No confrontation, no words, just observation. Her presence alone felt like a statement. Later that evening, another note appeared on my truck. "You don't want this to get ugly." Still no signature. I reported it, filed it away, added it to a growing folder labeled just in case. At night, I lay awake replaying everything, wondering how many people had heard her version before they ever heard mine. How many had already decided who was right based on familiarity alone. It wasn't that the system didn't work. It was that it hadn't caught up yet. And in that gap between being right and being enforced, pressure thrived. They weren't rushing. They didn't need to. Every day they stayed made their presence feel more permanent. Every week that passed made my claim feel more abstract. I realized then what their real average was, not force, time. They were waiting for me to get tired, to miss a payment, to decide the fight wasn't worth it, to become the villain who gave up. Standing on the edge of the clearing one evening, watching smoke drift into the cold air, I felt the anxiety loop tighten. Nothing dramatic was happening, and that was exactly the problem. Because when nothing happens long enough, people start to believe that nothing ever will. The shift didn't come from a confrontation. There was no dramatic moment, no raised voices or sudden revelation. It arrived quietly, disguised as routine, buried inside something so ordinary I almost missed it. It started with a bill. I was sitting at my kitchen table late one night, papers spread out in uneven stacks, the way they accumulate when you're trying to impose order on a situation that refuses to cooperate. Deed copies, notes from phone calls, photos of handwritten signs and taped messages. I'd been organizing everything into a timeline, partly for my lawyer, partly to remind myself that this was real, that I wasn't imagining the slow pressure, the way the ground kept shifting under my feet. The envelope had been sitting off to the side, unopened, mixed in with other mail I hadn't bothered sorting yet. County letterhead, nothing urgent looking. I tore it open absently, expecting something routine. Property tax assessment. I scanned the page, eyes moving automatically down the columns. Parcel number, acreage, assessed value, Then I froze. There was a line item near the bottom that didn't belong. Occupancy status, vacant. I read it again, slower this time. Vacant. According to the county, the house wasn't occupied. Hat alone wasn't shocking. Tax records lag. Databases update slowly. But something about it tugged at me, an itch at the back of my mind that wouldn't go away. I flipped to the next page. Occupancy verification date, 8 months prior. I stared at the number, then reached for my notebook, flipping back through my own notes. 8 months. That was the same timeline Karen had stumbled over during our conversation, the same moment her confidence had faltered just slightly when I'd mentioned it out loud. 8 months ago, the county had officially recorded the property as vacant, not temporarily unused, not seasonal, vacant. I leaned back in my chair and let that settle. If they'd been living there, really living there, the county would have known. Utility hookups, mail forwarding, any number of small bureaucratic footprints that prove a place is occupied, especially over time. I told myself not to jump to conclusions. This wasn't proof of anything on its own. It was just a detail. But details mattered now. The next morning, I drove into town and stopped by the county records office. I didn't announce myself, didn't mention the dispute. I just asked questions the way anyone might. "Can you tell me how occupancy status is determined?" I asked the clerk, casual. She shrugged. "Utilities, inspections, affidavits. Sometimes neighbors report it. Sometimes it's just based on activity. And if someone's living on a property without notifying the county..." She raised an eyebrow. "Then as far as we're concerned, they're not." I thanked her and left, the words echoing in my head. As far as we're concerned. Over the next few days, I started looking at everything errantly. Not as a battle of claims, but as a paper trail, or the absence of one. I pulled utility records. The electric account had been inactive until recently. Water usage showed a sudden spike less than a year ago, after months of nothing. No long-term pattern, no steady history. I checked voter registration rolls. Nothing at that address. School district records. The kids weren't enrolled locally. Mail delivery logs showed no established recipients until very recently, and even then inconsistently. Each piece on its own meant very little. Together, they told a story that didn't match theirs. Still, I said nothing. That was the hardest part. Every instinct screamed to confront them, to walk back up the mountain and lay it all out. But something told me to wait, to watch, to listen, to let them keep talking. Because when people believe they're winning, they get careless. It happened at the hardware store. I was picking up supplies I didn't even need, just to have an excuse to be in town without looking like I was hiding. Karen was there too, standing near the counter, chatting with the clerk like they were old friends. I stayed in the next aisle, pretending to compare drill bits, listening without looking. "He promised us," she was saying, voice easy, practiced. "Said as long as we kept the place up, it would be ours." The clerk nodded sympathetically. "How long were you all there?" Karen didn't hesitate. "Since the early 90s. I felt my breath catch. Early 90s. That wasn't what she'd said before. I waited, heart thudding, as the clerk made a small sound of surprise. "That long?" "Oh yeah," Karen replied. "We've been paying taxes on it taxes." That word landed hard, because I knew with absolute certainty that it wasn't true. I'd paid the taxes. Every record showed it. Before me, the estate had. Before that, the owner. There was no gap, no overlap. No mysterious third party contributing quietly in the background. Karen was lying, not loudly, not dramatically, but definitively, and the lie wasn't just for me, it was for everyone. I didn't interrupt, didn't reveal myself. I paid for my items and left, hands shaking slightly as I loaded them into my truck. At the time, I didn't realize that one sentence would undo everything they were claiming. I just knew something had shifted. From that point on, I started documenting not just what they did, but what they said. And when, dates mattered. They said they'd been there since the 90s, but the house had been unoccupied for long stretches. They said they paid taxes, but there were no records. They said the owner promised them the house, but probate had closed without a whisper of their existence. Every claim relied on time, and time was exactly where they were wrong. I mentioned none of this to the sheriff. Not yet. Mentioned none of it to the lawyer either. Just passed along documents without commentary. Let her draw her own conclusions. Karen's family continued as if nothing had changed. The notes stopped appearing, replaced by something else, casualness, familiarity. They waved more, laughed louder, let people see them working on the property. They were getting comfortable. That's when I noticed something else. A small sign near the driveway. Handwritten, laminated, private residence, EST 2016. I stared at it longer than I should. Have, established 2016. Not the 90s. Not decades ago. 2016. I took a photo. They'd adjusted their story without realizing it, narrowed the timeline, anchored themselves to a date that could be checked. I drove away without a word, heart pounding, not with anger but with clarity. This wasn't about belief anymore. It was about contradictions, and contradictions don't need confrontation, they just need daylight. I still didn't know how it would end. I didn't know which detail would matter most, or which record would finally force the system to catch up. But for the first time since this started, I felt something close to momentum. They were still confident, still waiting me out. They just didn't realize they'd already made the mistake that would eventually make waiting impossible. The change didn't arrive with sirens or shouting. There was no dramatic standoff on the porch, no moment where anyone stormed out in handcuffs or admitted they'd been lying all along. If anything, it was almost disappointingly quiet. That's how real consequences usually show up. It started with emails, not angry ones, not threatening ones, just neutral, carefully worded messages from people whose job it was to look at facts and timelines and decide what fit and what didn't. The kind of emails that don't care how confident someone sounds or how long a story has been repeated around town. My lawyer asked for everything. Not just the deed and the title report, but the small things, tax receipts, utility records, dated photos, copies of notes left on the property, screenshots of messages. She didn't react much as she reviewed them. No raised eyebrows, no commentary, just quiet orting. These are good, she said finally. Not dramatic, just consistent. Consistency mattered more than anything else. She sent a formal notice of ownership and demand for possession, not aggressive, not emotional, just precise. It cited the recorded deed, the probate closure date, the tax payments, the occupancy inconsistencies. Every sentence tied to a document, every claim anchored to a date. Karen's family didn't respond right away. They didn't need to. For months, they'd operated in a gray area where confidence filled in the gaps. But paperwork doesn't argue, it just waits. The sheriff's office called me a week later. "Just to let you know," the deputy said, his tone neutral, "we've reviewed the documentation you submitted." "And?" I asked. "And it clarifies things." Clarify was the word everyone seemed to use. Not win, not prove, clarify. As if the situation had always been foggy, and now someone had finally turned on a light. They still called it a civil matter, but a different kind of civil matter now. One with timelines that didn't line up and claims that didn't match records. One where "we've always been here" couldn't survive contact with dates stamped by the county. An official notice went up on the cabin door shortly after. Plain paper, typed. No names in bold, no accusations. Notice of ownership dispute. Occupancy subject to court review. It wasn't an eviction. Not yet. But it changed everything. The tone shifted almost immediately. Karen stopped waving. The lawn chairs disappeared from the porch. The flag came down. The trucks parked farther away, no longer sitting squarely in the driveway like a statement. The garden went untended. Hay weren't gone. But they were no longer settled. Neighbors who'd been distant before grew cautious. Not friendly exactly, but quieter, less certain. Stories lose power when official language enters the picture. Rumors don't like footnotes. I ran into the same clerk at the hardware store a week later. She didn't apologize, didn't acknowledge anything directly, just rang up my purchase and said, "Weather's turning early this year." It was the closest thing to neutrality I'd felt in weeks. The next step came through certified mail. a request for documentation supporting residency claims, tax receipts, utility bills, affidavits, anything. Karen's family had always spoken as if these things existed somewhere, as if paperwork was just an optional formality they chose not to engage in. Now it wasn't optional. They submitted a packet. Thin, incomplete, handwritten statements. No corroboration, no continuous records, dates that shifted subtly from one page to the next. The response came back just as neutrally as everything else had. Insufficient. No one accused them of lying. No one called them squatters. The system didn't need to. It simply compared claims to records and found one side lacking. The waiting strategy stopped working after that. Their leverage had always been uncertainty. Once that evaporated, there was nothing left to apply pressure with. They requested extensions, bought time, adjusted their story again. Less history, more hardship. Less ownership, more misunderstanding. It didn't matter. Timelines don't bend for emotion. A formal notice of required vacancy was issued, contingent on court scheduling. Not immediate, not punitive, just inevitable. I drove up the mountain one afternoon and parked at the edge of the clearing. I didn't approach the house, didn't need to. The atmosphere had changed. The smoke was gone, the curtains were drawn, the place looked smaller somehow. Less claimed. Karen came out onto the porch while I was there. We didn't speak. She looked tired, not defeated, just worn down by the realization that confidence had finally met something it couldn't overpower. A week later, they were gone. Not all at once. No dramatic exit, just gradual absence. Fewer lights at night, then none. The truck stopped appearing. The door stayed shut. By the time the final paperwork cleared, the house was empty. I walked through it alone for the first time after everything was settled. No damage, no vandalism, just signs of hurried living, half-packed boxes, forgotten tools, a calendar still pinned to the wall. It felt strangely anticlimactic. No one yelled. No one celebrated. The rules just applied. The sheriff stopped by briefly to confirm vacancy. He was polite, professional. He didn't take sides, didn't ask questions. Just checked boxes on a form and handed me a copy. Call if there's any issue, he said. There wasn't. The mountain went quiet again. The good kind this time. Looking back, what struck me most wasn't that the system worked. It was how unremarkable it was once it finally did. No drama, no moral speeches. Just paperwork aligning with reality. Karen's family hadn't been crushed. They hadn't been humiliated. They'd simply lost the space where their story could operate unchecked. And without that space, there was nothing left to argue. Standing on the porch that evening, keys in my hand, I felt something settled that had been rattling loose for months. Not triumph, not anger. Closure. The house was mine because the records said it was. Because the timelines matched. Because the law didn't care who sounded more convincing. And for the first time since I'd driven up that mountain road, that was enough. The quiet came back slowly, the way it always does after something loud has been pretending to be normal for too long. At first it was just the absence of movement. No trucks grinding up the road in the morning. No doors opening and closing when the wind shifted. No silhouettes passing the windows at night. The house didn't feel empty right away. It felt paused, like it was waiting to see if the noise would return. I'd park at the edge of the clearing and sit in the car for a minute before getting out, not because I was afraid anymore, but because I was unlearning a habit. For months, every arrival had come with tension, with scanning, with bracing myself for someone else to decide I didn't belong where I was standing. That took time to fade. The mountain sounded different once it was just the mountain again. Wind through the trees, birds arguing over nothing, the faint creak of the house settling as temperatures shifted. Those sounds hadn't been gone before. I just hadn't been able to hear them under everything else. The first day I unlocked the door without hesitation felt strange. I paused with the key halfway turned, waiting for that familiar jolt of doubt. It didn't come. The lock opened like it was supposed to. The door swung inward. No commentary, no confrontation, just a house. Inside, the air was stale but calm. Dust motes floated in the light the same way they must have decades ago. The place didn't carry anger. It carried time. That was the thing I'd almost forgotten. Buildings don't take sides, they just endure whatever people project onto them. I started small with the renovation, not because the work itself was overwhelming, but because I didn't want to rush past the moment. Clearing out old debris, sweeping floors that hadn't been properly cleaned in years, opening windows, and letting the cold mountain air move through rooms that had been sealed tight with tension. Each task felt quietly symbolic, even when I told myself it wasn't. Neighbors began to wave again, tentatively at first. Then, with the easy familiarity they'd had before the story ever started circulating, no one brought it up directly, no apologies, no explanations. That too felt like part of the lesson. People don't like to examine how easily they accept a confident narrative, especially when it saves them from having to think too hard. It's more comfortable to pretend confusion was inevitable than to admit no one asked for proof when they should have. I didn't hold it against them. I understood it better now. As the weeks passed, the house shifted from being the problem to being the project. Lumber stacked by the porch, tools laid out in the mornings. A rhythm returned, one based on effort instead of defense. There were moments, standing in the middle of a half-renovated room, when the whole thing replayed in my head, how close it had come to going differently, how easily I could have doubted myself enough to walk away. How many people do, not because they're wrong, but because they're tired. That's the part that sticks with me. This didn't happen because of some elaborate scheme or rare legal loophole. It happened because confidence filled a vacuum, because repetition became truth by sheer persistence, because no one wanted to be the person who asked, "Can you show me that in writing?" And for a while, that was enough to override reality. I thought about how many abandoned houses there are, how many elderly owners, how many properties passed down with messy paperwork and good faith assumptions, how many people don't have the time, money, or energy to push back when someone louder insists they belong. This house wasn't special in that way. That realization was heavier than any anger I'd felt earlier. The system didn't fail because it was broken. It failed because it hadn't been asked to show up yet. And until it was, the loudest voice carried the most weight. Standing on the porch one evening, watching the light fade over the trees, I realized something else too. If I hadn't had documentation, if one date hadn't been clear, if one record had been missing, the ending might have been very different. Not because I was wrong, but because certainty had been performed more convincingly by someone else. That's unsettling. The house is quieter now, warmer, slowly becoming what it was always meant to be, a place, not a battleground. The story doesn't linger in the walls the way you might expect. It lingers in the lesson. Because this wasn't really about a mountain house. It was about how easily confidence gets mistaken for authority. How quickly people stop asking questions once a story sounds settled. How often everyone knows replaces "can you prove it?" If there's anything worth taking from this, it's that paperwork matters, but so does skepticism, especially the quiet kind. The kind that doesn't accuse, doesn't argue, just asks for receipts before it agrees. The scariest part wasn't being challenged. It was how long the challenge worked without evidence. And that's the part that could happen anywhere. Because if confidence sounds like authority long enough, people stop asking for proof.